My stepmother convinced everyone her son owns my house. Now he's using my address for everything. Original post. I, 31M, need advice because I'm losing my mind over what my stepmother is doing, and my family is completely divided. I've been a licensed plumber for 9 years, and I spent the last 8 of those years saving every penny I could to buy my own property. No vacations, no fancy cars, no eating out, just 60-hour weeks and a dream of owning rental property that could eventually give me financial freedom. Let me explain what 8 years of saving really meant. I lived in a studio apartment above a garage that didn't have proper heating. I drove a 1998 Honda Civic with 290,000 miles on it that I maintained myself. My idea of splurging was buying name-brand cereal instead of generic. While my friends were getting married, traveling to Europe, and upgrading their lives, I was eating beans and rice 5 nights a week and picking up every emergency weekend call that came through the plumbing company. Last year, I finally did it. I bought a duplex in a decent neighborhood for $385,000. It's a 1950s brick building with 2 units. Each has 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and about 1,100 square feet. I live in one side and rent out the other for $1,800 a month. The mortgage payment is $2,100, so with the rental income, I'm only paying $300 per month to live there while building equity. It was the proudest moment of my life, until my stepmother Sharon, 44F, decided to create an alternate reality where her son owns it. Let me give you essential background about my family dynamics. My parents divorced when I was 15 after my mom discovered my dad's affair with a coworker. The divorce was messy and expensive, and Mom moved 3 states away for a fresh start. Dad married Sharon 3 years later when I was 18, and she brought her son Kyle, now 28M, into the family. Kyle was 15 when our parents married, and we were never close. Different interests, different values, different everything. While I was doing apprenticeships and working construction sites in the blazing heat and freezing cold, Kyle was bouncing between college majors, first business, then marketing, then communications, then dropping out altogether after 6 years and $80,000 in student loans with no degree. That's fine. Everyone has their path. But Sharon always acted like Kyle was destined for greatness while treating my blue-collar success as something temporary or lesser. She once introduced me at a party as the one who works with pipes, while describing Kyle as the future entrepreneur. The day I closed on the duplex, I made what I now realize was a critical mistake. I organized a family dinner at Dad's house to celebrate. I was genuinely excited and wanted to share my achievement with everyone. I even brought champagne, real champagne, not sparkling wine, because this was the biggest moment of my professional life. Sharon's immediate response was to interrogate me about how I could possibly afford it. Not congratulations, not well done, just pure skepticism. When I explained I'd been saving for 8 years and showed them pictures on my phone, she actually said, "Well, that's nice that the bank gave you such a big loan. These predatory lending practices are really getting out of hand." The loan was only $280,000. I put down over $100,000 in cash, plus another $5,000 in closing costs. But she couldn't seem to process that her stepson, the plumber, had that kind of money saved. Kyle just sat there scrolling through his phone, occasionally glancing up to make snide comments about how being a landlord was exploiting the working class, rich coming from someone who hadn't worked in 2 years. Here's where things get insane. About 3 months after I bought the place, I started getting mail addressed to Kyle at my address. First, it was just some promotional stuff from a gym, which I figured was a mistake. Then it was his bank statements from Wells Fargo. Then official government mail from the state unemployment office. I texted Kyle immediately with a photo of the mail. He said he was updating his address for some things, and that it was no big deal. When I pressed him on why he was using my address, he got defensive and said I was being paranoid and that family doesn't make a big deal about small stuff like this. 2 weeks later, I get an official notice from the DMV that there was an issue with vehicle registration at my address. I had to take time off work, losing about $400 in wages, to go to the DMV office. Turns out, Kyle had registered his car to my address. The problem? The duplex is in Washington County, and he actually lives with his girlfriend in Multnomah County. The registration fees and taxes are about $200 less per year in my county. He was committing fraud, using my address to save money on registration. But wait, it gets so much worse. I confronted him at the next family gathering, Dad's birthday dinner at a restaurant. In front of everyone, Dad, Sharon, my uncle, 2 cousins, and Dad's best friend, I told Kyle to stop using my address immediately. I tried to be calm and rational, explaining that it could cause legal problems for both of us. His response: "Dad promised this place would be mine eventually anyway. I'm just getting things ready for the transition." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The entire table went silent. I looked at my father, who had turned pale. "What is he talking about?" I asked. My father looked mortified and started stammering. Sharon jumped in, her voice sickly sweet but her eyes cold. "Oh, Michael, don't be dramatic. Family helps family. Since you have a whole duplex all to yourself, you shouldn't be selfish about something as simple as an address. Kyle is transitioning into property management, and this is good practice for him." She then turned to my uncle and cousins and announced that Kyle was co-investing in the property and would be taking over one of the units soon as part of his new property management business. She said it with such confidence that my cousin actually congratulated Kyle. This was complete fiction. Kyle has never given me a cent. His name isn't on any paperwork. There is no co-investment. There is no property management business. I bought this property myself, with my own money that I earned breaking my back for nearly a decade, destroying my knees crawling under houses, and developing chronic back pain from hauling water heaters up and down stairs. I told Sharon she was lying, my voice probably louder than it should have been in a restaurant. She had the audacity to say I was being disrespectful and making a scene, and that blood is thicker than water, which is particularly rich coming from someone who isn't even blood-related to me. My dad pulled me aside in the parking lot afterward and admitted that Sharon had been telling people that he was helping Kyle buy into my property as a silent partner. She'd told his golf buddies, their church group, and even his siblings that Kyle was becoming a real estate investor with Dad's backing. Dad hadn't agreed to any of this and was as confused as I was. But here's the thing, he wouldn't stand up to her. He just kept saying we should work it out as a family, and that I should be patient with Kyle while he finds his path. "His path doesn't lead through my house, Dad," I told him. Update 1, 2 days later. I thought setting the record straight at the birthday dinner would end this nonsense. I was catastrophically wrong. My tenant in the other unit, a nice older lady named Mrs. Chen who's never been late with rent, texted me yesterday asking if I was selling. My heart dropped. When I said absolutely not and asked why, she sent me screenshots from Facebook that made my blood pressure skyrocket. Sharon had posted in 3 different local community groups, Washington County Neighbors, Portland Area Housing, and Pacific Northwest Property Owners, that her son was taking over property management for a duplex at my address and was looking for recommendations for renovations. She'd included photos of my property that she must have taken during a visit. The comments were full of people congratulating Kyle on his new business venture, and Sharon responding with things like, "So proud of my entrepreneur son," and "He's worked so hard for this," and "Following his dreams in real estate." One person asked if the current tenants would be staying, and Sharon actually replied, "Changes are coming. Kyle has big plans for improvements." Mrs. Chen was understandably concerned about her housing situation. I had to spend an hour on the phone assuring her that nothing was changing, she wasn't being evicted, and no one named Kyle had any authority over the property. I immediately called my lawyer. Yes, I had to get a lawyer involved in family drama. His name is Jim, and he's handled real estate transactions for other plumbers I know. He advised me to document everything and send a formal cease and desist letter to both Kyle and Sharon. The letter would cost me $500 to draft and send, but he said it was essential to establish a paper trail. While I was dealing with that, I got an email from my mortgage company asking about additional parties on my loan. My stomach dropped. Apparently, someone had called claiming to be a co-owner trying to get information about the account. They wanted to know the balance, payment history, and when the next payment was due. The bank, thankfully, had refused to provide information without proper authorization, but they wanted to verify that no one else should have access. I drove to my dad's house that evening, my hands shaking with rage. Not to fight, but to try to understand what was happening. Dad looked tired, defeated even. He was sitting in his recliner with a beer, and he aged 10 years when he saw me at the door. He admitted that Sharon had been pressuring him for months to help Kyle get established, and that she'd convinced herself that my success meant I could afford to share. She'd been telling him that since I didn't have a wife or kids, I was being greedy, keeping both units. "Share what?" I asked him. "My house. The one I bought with my own money. The one I saved for while Kyle was failing out of college." He couldn't look me in the eye. "She thinks because you're not married and don't have kids, you don't really need all that space. She says Kyle deserves a chance at building wealth too. Then he can save his money like I did." I said. "He can work 60-hour weeks. He can eat ramen for dinner and skip vacations and drive a crappy car for 8 years. "I know," Dad said quietly. "I know you worked for it. But Sharon, she interprets things differently. She thinks success should be shared in a family." That's when Sharon came home from her book club. She saw my truck in the driveway and walked in already on the defensive. She immediately started in about how I was harassing them and making Kyle feel unwelcome in the family. "He's making himself unwelcome by committing fraud with my address," I said. She laughed. Actually laughed. "It's just an address, Michael. You're acting like he's stealing from you. This is what's wrong with your generation. No sense of family, no loyalty. My parents would have been ashamed of me if I didn't help my siblings succeed. Kyle isn't my sibling. He's your son. And using my address for fraud isn't help, it's theft." She called me dramatic and said I should be grateful that Kyle even wants to be involved with my little rental business. Little. She called my $385,000 investment little. She said Kyle was doing me a favor by lending his business acumen to my working-class investment. Update 2, 1 week later. The cease and desist letters were sent via certified mail, requiring signature confirmation. Sharon received hers and, according to my dad, went absolutely ballistic. She called me 17 times in 2 hours, leaving increasingly unhinged voicemails. In one, she was crying about how I was destroying Kyle's future. In another, she was screaming that I was not a real man for involving lawyers. In the last one, she threatened to sue me for defamation and emotional distress. My lawyer had included in the letter that using my address for fraudulent purposes, including DMV registration in a different county, was a crime, and that any further attempts to claim ownership or association with my property would result in legal action. He'd also discovered that Kyle had filed a change of address form with USPS, officially forwarding mail from his actual address to mine. Kyle's reaction was different and came 3 days later. He showed up at my house at 10 p.m. on a Thursday, drunk, with his girlfriend Chelsea, 26F. I could smell the alcohol from 6 feet away. Chelsea, it turns out, had no idea about any of this. She thought Kyle had bought the duplex and I was the one living there as his tenant. Kyle had been telling her for months that he was a property owner, that he'd inherited money from a grandmother, who is still alive, by the way, and invested it in real estate. When she found out the truth, that Kyle was unemployed, living off her income as a dental hygienist, and lying about owning my house, she lost it. The fight that ensued on my front lawn was so loud that Mrs. Chen came out concerned, and my neighbor across the street threatened to call the police. "You told me we were building a future together." Chelsea screamed. "You said you were collecting rent. You showed me bank statements." Apparently, Kyle had been doctoring bank statements, adding a fictional monthly deposit of $1,800 labeled rental income. He'd been using this to convince Chelsea to pay for everything in their relationship while he reinvested his rental profits into the business. Chelsea drove off, leaving Kyle on my porch, where he proceeded to have a complete breakdown, alternating between blaming me and begging for help. "You couldn't just play along," he slurred, tears streaming down his face. "I wasn't hurting anyone." Chelsea's parents were finally respecting me. They thought I was successful. "Mom said you'd understand because we're family." I told him to get an Uber and leave. He said he couldn't afford one. Chelsea had been paying for his Uber account. I ended up driving him to his girlfriend's apartment, during which he made a confession that made my blood boil. He had applied for a business license using my address. Not just any business, a property management company called KM Property Solutions. He was planning to use my legitimate property ownership as proof of experience to scam other people into letting him manage their rentals. He'd already met with 2 potential clients, telling them he owned and managed multiple properties. "Mom said you'd never find out," he admitted, his words slurring together. "She said you're too busy working to pay attention to paperwork stuff. She helped me with the website." Website. There was a website. Update 3 days later. The website was professional looking, which made it worse somehow. Sharon had apparently paid a web designer $3,000 to create it. The homepage featured a photo of my duplex with the caption, "Our flagship property, setting the standard for quality rental management." There were pages for Our Properties, just my duplex, Our Team, just Kyle, listed as CEO and Senior Property Acquisition Specialist, and Testimonials, all fake. One testimonial, supposedly from Mrs. C, said, "Kyle's attention to detail and professional management style has made being a tenant a joy. He responds immediately to any concerns and truly cares about his properties." Mrs. Chen had never met Kyle and was horrified when I showed her. My lawyer discovered that Kyle had actually registered an LLC, gotten an EIN from the IRS, and opened a business bank account. He'd been telling people at networking events, yes, he was attending property management networking events, that he managed a portfolio worth nearly $400,000. He was charging consultation fees to other wannabe landlords, giving them advice on property management despite never having managed anything in his life. 3 people had paid him $500 each for consulting services. He was literally taking money from people based on the lie that he owned my house. That's when the family really took sides. My aunt, Dad's sister, called to say I was being vindictive and ruining a young man's ambition. She said I should have just let Kyle use the address until he got on his feet, and that successful people have an obligation to lift others up. When I asked her if she'd like me to give Kyle her address to use for fraud, she hung up on me. My cousin, 36M, texted to say he understood my position but thought I should find a compromise to keep the peace. He suggested maybe I could actually hire Kyle to manage the property for a small fee, just to make it legitimate. When I pointed out that Kyle had no experience, no license, and no knowledge of property management, he said I could teach him. 2 of Sharon's sisters called me, one to scream at me for attacking a struggling young man, and another to tell me Kyle had asked to borrow $10,000 from her for property improvements on his investment property. Then my grandmother, 79F, Dad's mom, called. I expected her to guilt me too, but instead, she said something that made me tear up. Your grandfather would be so proud of what you've accomplished, Michael. He was a plumber too, you know, back in the 60s. Don't let anyone take that away from you. Not even family. Especially not that woman your father married. She told me that Sharon had been going around the entire extended family for months, telling everyone that Kyle was a successful property investor. She'd shown people photos of my duplex at family gatherings I didn't attend, claiming it was Kyle's. She'd even convinced some relatives to consider hiring him for their own rental properties. Update 4, 2 weeks later. Last week, everything came to a head in the most ridiculous way possible. I received a court summons. Kyle was actually suing me for unlawful eviction and damages related to his business ventures. He was claiming that I had verbally agreed to let him use the property for his business and was now reneging, causing him to lose clients and damage to his reputation. My lawyer Jim laughed when he saw the paperwork. It was clearly drafted by Kyle himself using some online template, and it was full of legal gibberish that made no sense. He'd cited laws that didn't exist and referenced cases that had nothing to do with property law. But it still meant I had to respond, which meant more legal fees, another $2,000 to file a response and countersue. That same day, my dad finally grew a spine. He called to tell me that he'd discovered something that made him see Sharon clearly for the first time. He'd found credit card statements hidden in Sharon's jewelry box while looking for cufflinks. She'd been financially supporting Kyle's business, using their joint credit cards, racking up almost $15,000 in debt. The charges included $3,000 for the website, a $2,000 for business cards and marketing materials, a $4,000 for a business wardrobe for Kyle, $1,500 for a laptop, a $800 monthly lease on a BMW Kyle needed to look successful for clients, various charges at high-end restaurants where Kyle was meeting clients. Dad was devastated. He'd been planning to retire in 3 years, but this debt would push that back by at least 2 more years. He confronted Sharon, who broke down and admitted she'd been investing in Kyle's future because she knew Dad would never agree to it if she asked. Dad told Sharon she needed to get Kyle to drop the lawsuit and stop the lies, or he was filing for divorce. Sharon's response was to blame me entirely. She called me sobbing, saying I'd ruined her son's future and turned her husband against her. She begged me to just share the prosperity and let Kyle have something to be proud of. What about what I'm proud of? I asked her. What about the 8 years I worked for this? What about my future? She said, you can always buy another house. You're young, you have a trade. Kyle needs this one. He needs a foundation to build on. You're destroying a young man's confidence. Yesterday, Kyle dropped the lawsuit. Not because he realized he was wrong, but because the lawyer he finally consulted told him he'd be countersued into oblivion. My lawyer was prepared to go after him for fraud, identity theft, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The lawyer also informed Kyle that he could face criminal charges for the DMV fraud and potentially for fraud related to his fake business. But the damage to the family is done. My dad moved out and is staying with my grandmother. Sharon is living with Kyle, who is also single now. Chelsea not only dumped him but also posted on social media about his lies, warning other women. Kyle is apparently now claiming I turned Chelsea against him and ruined his relationship too. Final update, 1 month later. It's been a month since everything exploded, and I wanted to give one last update about where things stand. The legal issues are mostly resolved. Kyle had to formally agree in writing never to use my address for anything, never to claim any ownership or management of my property, and never to contact my tenants. The DMV went after him for fraud, He's facing $5,000 in fines and has to do 200 hours of community service. The business license was revoked, and he's barred from applying for another one using my address. The 3 people he scammed for consulting are suing him in small claims court. Dad filed for divorce. During the proceedings, even more came out. Sharon had opened 2 credit cards in Dad's name without his knowledge, claiming they were for Kyle's investments. Total debt, $32,000. She'd also taken out a personal loan of $10,000, forging Dad's signature. Dad's having to sell his boat, his motorcycle, and take a loan from his 401k to pay it all off. The lawyer says he might be able to recover some in the divorce, but Sharon has no assets, everything was in Dad's name. He apologized to me last week over dinner at my grandmother's house. Really apologized. Not the, I'm sorry but, kind, a real, genuine apology. He said he'd been so afraid of being alone again after Mom left that he'd let Sharon control everything. He admitted he knew she was lying about the property but hoped it would blow over if he stayed quiet. He's in therapy now, twice a week, working through why he enabled this for so long. I failed you as a father, he said. I should have protected what you built. I should have been proud of you publicly, not just privately. Your mother would be disgusted with me. As for Kyle, last I heard through the grapevine, he was living with Sharon in a 1-bedroom apartment, still unemployed, still telling anyone who'll listen that I stole his property empire. He's created a whole narrative where he was a successful businessman until I sabotaged him out of jealousy. He claims I was envious of his education and potential, so I destroyed his business when it was about to take off. Sharon still sends me texts occasionally, alternating between calling me horrible names and begging me to help Kyle get started. Last week she sent, "You've destroyed a mother's love for her child's success. I hope your money keeps you warm at night when you're old and alone." I don't respond. I've blocked her on everything except text, and I only keep that open in case of genuine emergency with Dad. The extended family is slowly coming around. My aunt apologized after learning about the fraud and the debt. She had no idea it had gone that far. My cousin admitted he would have done the same thing in my position. Even one of Sharon's sisters reached out to apologize and thank me. Kyle had actually approached her husband about investing $50,000 in a property he claimed to be buying. The duplex is thriving. Mrs. Chen renewed her lease with a small discount for dealing with the drama. She also referred her niece to me when I had a plumbing issue at her restaurant. I've made improvements to my side, new kitchen cabinets, refinished hardwood floors, and a new bathroom vanity. I installed a comprehensive security system with cameras, not because I'm worried about break-ins from strangers, but because Kyle drove by several times in the first week after everything went down, just sitting outside in his car at weird hours. My grandmother has become my biggest supporter. She told me stories about my grandfather I'd never heard, how he started his plumbing business in 1963 with just $500 and some borrowed tools, how he worked 7 days a week to buy their first house. She said he would have been proud that I didn't let anyone take what I'd earned. Your grandfather had a saying, she told me. Never loan money to family, never hire family, and never let family make you small. You remembered that last part when it mattered. Here's what I've learned from all this mess. Document everything. Every text, email, piece of mail. If I hadn't saved everything, the cease and desist wouldn't have been as effective. Get a lawyer sooner rather than later. Pride isn't worth letting things escalate. Some people will create elaborate fantasies rather than face their own failures. Sharon couldn't accept that Kyle was a failure, so she tried to steal my success for him. Enablers are just as dangerous as manipulators. Dad's weakness let this spiral completely out of control. Success makes you a target, even within your own family. Maybe especially within your own family. You can't choose your relatives, but you can choose whether to let them destroy what you've built. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. The hardest part isn't the family I've lost, it's realizing I never really had them in the first place. They didn't see me as Michael, the person who worked hard and achieved something. They saw me as Michael, the resource to be exploited for Kyle's benefit. But you know what? I'm okay with that. I come home every day to MY Duplex, check MY mail without anxiety, and sleep soundly knowing that MY investment is secure. Mrs. Chen brings me cookies sometimes and tells me I'm a good landlord. My grandmother has Sunday dinner with me now. My dad and I are slowly rebuilding our relationship with honesty this time. And Kyle? He's learning what I learned at 23, that success isn't inherited or stolen or faked. It's earned one exhausting day at a time, one sacrifice at a time, one saved dollar at a time. That's my story. 8 years of saving, 1 year of ownership, 6 months of insane family drama, and a lifetime lesson in standing up for yourself. The duplex stands solid, a testament to what's possible when you work for something instead of trying to take it from someone else. To anyone dealing with similar family members who feel entitled to your accomplishments, stand your ground. It's not selfish to protect what you've earned. It's not cruel to demand honesty. And it's not your fault when someone else's lies finally catch up with them.